This is Crystal Stanich, and thank you for joining me for this week's First Chapter Friday. Today I will be reading from Debbie Macomber's Alaska Nights, which is volume 2 of her Midnight Suns series. With this, we have 2 different books. We have Daddy's Little Helper and Because of the Baby. So I will be reading from the first chapter of Daddy's Little Helper. Hope you enjoy. Daddy's Little Helper. Chapter 1. September 1995. The new school teacher wouldn't last. It didn't take Mitch Harris more than 5 seconds to make that assessment. Bethany Ross didn't belong in Alaska. She reminded him of a tropical bird with its brilliant plumage. Everything about her was vivid, from her animated expression to her sun-bleached hair, which fell to her shoulders in a frothy mass of blonde. Even blonder curls framed her classic features. Her eyes were a deep, rich shade of chocolate. She wore a bright turquoise jumpsuit with a wide yellow band that circled her trim waist. One of her skimpy, multicolored sandals dangled from her foot as she sat on the arm of Abby and Sawyer O'Halloran's sofa, her legs elegantly crossed. This get-together was in her honor. Abby and Sawyer had invited the members of the school board to their home to meet the new teacher. To Mitch's surprise, she stood and approached him before he had a chance to introduce himself. "I don't believe we've met." Her smile was warm and natural. "I'm Bethany Ross." "Mitch Harris." He didn't elaborate. Details wouldn't be necessary, because Ms. Ross simply wouldn't last beyond the first snowfall. "Welcome to Hard Luck," he said, almost as an afterthought. "Thank you." "When did you get here?" he asked, trying to make conversation. He twisted the stem of his wineglass and watched the Chardonnay swirl against the sides. "I flew in this afternoon." He hadn't realized she'd only just arrived. "You must be exhausted." Not really," she was quick to tell him. "I suppose I should be, considering that I left San Francisco early this morning. The fact is, I've been keyed up for days." Mitch suspected Hard Luck was a sorry disappointment to her. The town, population 150, was about as far from the easy California lifestyle as a person could get. Situated 50 miles north of the Arctic Circle, Hard Luck was a fascinating place with a strong and abiding sense of community. People here lived hard and worked harder. Besides Midnight Suns, the flight service owned and operated by the 3 O'Halloran brothers, there were a few small businesses, like Ben Hamilton's Cafe. Mitch himself was one of a handful of state employees. He worked for the Department of the Interior, monitoring visits to the gate of the Arctic National Park. This was in addition to his job as the town's public safety officer, PSO, which meant he was responsible for policing in Hard Luck. Trappers wandered into town now and then, as did the occasional pipeline worker. To those living on the edge of the world, Hard Luck was a thriving metropolis. Lately, the town had piqued the interest of the rest of the country as well. But Bethany Ross had nothing to do with that. Thank heaven, although Mitch figured she'd stay about as long as some of the women of the O'Halloran brothers had brought to town. Until recently, only a small number of women had lived here. Not many were willing to endure the hardship of being this far from civilization. So the O'Hallorans had spearheaded a campaign to bring women to Hard Luck. Abby was one of their notable successes, but there'd been a few equally notable failures. Like, who was it? Allison somebody? The one who lasted less than 24 hours? And just last week, 2 women had arrived, only to return home on the next flight out. Bethany Ross had actually applied for the teaching job last spring, before all this nonsense. Unexpectedly, she smiled, a ravishing smile that seemed to say she'd read his thoughts. I plan to fulfill my contract, Mr. Harris. I knew what I was letting myself in for when I agreed to teach in Alaska. Mitch felt the heat rise to his ears. I didn't realize my feelings were so transparent. I don't blame you for doubting me. I don't exactly blend in with the others, do I? He was tempted to smile himself. Hard luck isn't what you expected, is it? I'll adjust. She said this with such confidence, he began to wonder if he'd misjudged her. Frankly, I didn't know what to expect. With hard luck in the news so often, the idea of moving here was beginning to worry me. Mitch didn't bother to conceal his amusement. He'd read what some of the tabloids had written about the town, and the men's scheme to lure women north. My dad was against my coming, Bethany continued. It was all I could do to keep him from flying up here with me. He seems to think Hard Luck's populated with nothing but love-starved bush pilots. He isn't far wrong, Mitch said wryly. If Bethany had only been in town a few hours, she probably hadn't met the pilots currently employed by Midnight Suns. He knew Sawyer had flown her in from Fairbanks. It was after repeatedly losing their best pilots for lack of female companionship that the O'Hallorans had decided to take action. Midnight Suns is the flight service. Owned by the O'Hallorans? She asked, looking flustered. Sawyer and his brothers? That's right. Mitch understood why she was confused. Immediately following her arrival, she'd been thrust into the middle of this party, with 20 or more names being thrown her way all at once. In an effort to help her, Mitch explained that Charles O'Halloran, the oldest of the three brothers, was a silent partner. Charles hadn't been so silent, however, when he learned about the scheme Sawyer and Christian had concocted to lure women to hard luck. Still, he changed his tune since meeting Laney Caldwell. Earlier in the week, they'd announced their engagement. Is it true that Abby, Sawyer's wife, was the first woman to come here? Her eyes revealed her curiosity. Yes, they got married this summer. But they look like they've been married for years. What about Scott and Susan? They're Abby's children from a previous marriage. I understand Sawyer's already started the adoption process. Mitch envied his friend's happiness. Marriage hadn't been nearly as happy an experience for him. Chrissy's your daughter? Bethany asked, glancing over at the children gathered around in Monopoly game. Mitch's gaze fell fondly on his 7-year-old daughter. Yes, and she's been on pins and needles waiting for school to start. Bethany's eyes softened. I met her earlier with Scott and Susan. She's a delightful little girl. Thank you. Mitch tried hard to do his best for Chrissy, though sometimes he wondered whether his best would ever be enough. You met Pete Livingood? He asked, gesturing toward a rugged-looking middle-aged man on the other side of the room. Yes. He owns the grocery store? That he does. Dottie, the woman on his left, is another one who answered the advertisement. Bethany blinked, as if trying to remember where Dottie fit into the small community. She's the nurse? He nodded. Pete and Dottie plan to be married shortly. The first week of October, I believe. So soon? She didn't give him an opportunity to answer before directing her attention elsewhere. What about Mariah Douglas? Is she a recent addition to the town? Yep. She's the secretary for Midnight Suns. Is she engaged? Not yet, Mitch said, but it's still pretty early. She just got here last month. And that is the beginning of Debbie Macomber's Alaska Nights. If you would like to know what happens next, check this book out on the Hoopla app. And don't forget to join me again here next week for Alaska Dutchman, a Robert Sable mystery by Sean E. Thomas. Thank you and have a great day.